Okay, we are continuing our discussion of consent from Romans 14, and this is part of our gospel series, the Gospel of Romans. Yeshua told us that we're supposed to not lord it over other people. That's human authority. This is Matthew 20, 25, and 26. But Yeshua called them to himself and said, "You know that the rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and those who are great exercise authority over them. Yet it shall not be so among you. But whoever desires to become great among you, let him be your servant." So in a bottom-up type of authority system, which is what we're being told to do, where each individual has the right to consent based on his own individual study of the scripture, then you can't force anything on anybody. Okay? You look at every organization out there, churches, everything, they're all based on human authority. Human authority means God is not in authority. Simple as that. The only way for God to be an authority is for the scripture to be an authority. And the only way for the scripture to be an authority is for everyone to have consent. This is not democracy. In democracy, the majority forces the minority to do what they think is right. Consensus means that one individual who says, "No, I don't think this is right," can stop the whole process of making a decision on a topic. Why? Because that one individual may be right. That one individual may be wrong. We don't know. Until we come to a consensus, we don't know. How do you get consensus? You get consensus by pointing out scripture. If you can't point out scripture to make it very clear to everyone what this is saying, then you have to leave it up to individual preference. And that's the way we do it. We have some things that are very clear in the scripture, so clear that everyone goes along with it. And those things we make agreement on in the congregation, and we help each other to accomplish those things. Other things we can't come to agreement on. Why? Because it's not clear enough in Scripture. Either it's not clear in Scripture, or we don't know the Scripture well enough to make it clear. Okay? In either case, we need to go back and study it. We need to allow each individual to make their own applications, however they see it. Okay? This is what's going on in Romans 14. In vegetarianism, that is an issue which is not scriptural. You cannot say that you're supposed to be a vegetarian because scripture doesn't say that. Okay? So you can't force that on everybody, and a lot of people are not going to go along with it because you can't point out the scripture to say that because it's not in there. Okay? Holidays. Well, you can point out the scripture for that. That's pretty clear. We're supposed to be doing the holidays, the biblical holidays. Okay? But you don't force that on other people because that's an advanced topic. We haven't talked about holidays yet, so we don't enforce that. It's a ceremonial thing which we really don't get into until the second year of our study. So that's not something that we're going to force anybody to do. Okay, Shabbat would fall into that category. We're not going to force anybody to not work on Saturday because It's an advanced topic. It's not mentioned at this point in the path. So you don't push that on other people. Now, once we get to it on the path, then we're going to discuss it. But again, after discussing it, each one has to look at it himself, see what the scripture says, get thoroughly convinced by his study, and make his own decision. And then we come to a consensus on it, meaning that a portion of it we're going to all agree on because it's in the scripture, and a portion of it we're not going to agree on. And that portion is going to be individual application. Now we're going to help each other to accomplish what we're trying to accomplish. If you're having a difficulty doing something, if you've got a sin that is troubling you, and you go to the congregation and you say, hey, I need some help on this thing, then we want to step in with supervision and help you to accomplish what you're trying to accomplish. But I'm not going to go to you and tell you that you need to do thus and so, and I'm going to supervise you on it. Okay? Not until we come to a consensus on that issue. Now, when we get into Corinthians and Galatians, we get into this idea of supervising sins. We were told in Romans 14, don't judge other people. Don't judge because they belong to God, right? That is the foundational piece of advice on how to deal with people. That doesn't go away when we get into Corinthians and it starts talking about supervising. Let's read it. 1 Corinthians 5:12. For what have I to do with judging those who are outside? Do you not judge those who are inside? And this is talking about the fact that you've got this guy who's sleeping with his stepmother, and we're supposed to be judging him, okay? Because right up front in the Romans level, we said that we're not going to fornicate. We made that agreement. And this guy is going back on that agreement. Okay, so this is an area that we should be supervising. And because he is not cooperating with that, he is going against what he has decided to do, then we have to kick him out of the congregation. But we go to him as a servant. We go to him humbly, and we say, hey, it has been reported that you're sleeping with your stepmother. Is this true? Let's look at the scripture on this. You should not be doing this, in my opinion. Okay? Now, what is his answer to this? Okay, so we don't go to him and say, hey, I'm kicking you out of the congregation. And I've been on the receiving end of this thing, okay? The pastor comes with a thug and says, hey, I don't like what you're doing, and I really don't care what the scripture says about it, but we're kicking you out of the congregation. Okay, that kind of attitude is not what we're talking about in judging. And that's the whole point that I'm making here, is that when we judge, it has to be done with the foundation of consent. Without this foundation, the judging becomes authoritarian dictatorship. Okay, so you can look at religions, look at churches. They take one of two stances on it. Most churches, they just throw out the judging altogether and let anybody come into the church that who's doing whatever sin that they want to do. You know, that as long as they're throwing money in the bucket, they don't care, right? But there are other churches which say, which are doing the judging. So there's other churches that are doing the judging, and they use a dictatorship type of style where they are coming in and forcing people to do what they want them to do or kick them out. Now we have the 7 steps of Romans, which is our line of who can be a member and who cannot be a member. But that all has to be agreed to. Okay, when a person comes into the congregation, they agree to all of that up front. And they say, this is what we want our community to be like. So if you want to join our community, this is what the deal is. If you don't want to join the community, then don't join the community. You know, welcome to be a visitor. So so it's all consent, all the way along. Galatians 6:1. Brethren, if a man is overtaken in any trespass, you who are spiritual, restore such a one in a spirit of gentleness, considering yourself, lest you also be tempted. When you go to a person to correct them, you have to recognize that that person has to consent to whatever you're discussing in the conversation. This has to be paramount. This has to be the foundation of the conversation. If it is not, then you are using your force, your nagging, your authority. You're using something to pressurize that person to do something that he is not comfortable with, something that he has not studied thoroughly and has not come to that conclusion, or he's not willing to follow the scripture on that issue. In either case, he has the right to not consent to it. And we have to come to him gently and ask his permission to go along with this. Very, very important. It is the difference between the type of religion that is forcing versus a religion that is loving and gentle. Okay? A lot of people, they don't like to go to church because of, people are putting pressure on them for this thing or the other. Okay? That's something that we need to avoid at all costs. This is the foundation of how we deal with people. If you ever do anything that goes against this foundation, it's a big problem in the congregation, and it needs to be addressed and corrected, so that we can get along with each other, so that we're nice to each other. Okay? So this idea of consent has to be the foundation of everything that we do with each other. And as we go along, we're not going to be setting that aside for new instructions. We have to understand these new instructions in the light of consent. I hope this makes sense to you. If you have questions, please address them in the congregation or on the email, so that we can get this right, so that we're not causing friction in the group. So Romans 14, very, very important part of the Gospel of Romans. How to deal with each other has to be by consent.